to the West Virginia News Editorial Board interview. I thought we'd open things up, Mac, with giving you the ability to kind of introduce yourself and tell people about your background.
All right, well, good. Well, thanks. Good to be with you. Thanks for hosting this. My name is Mac Warner. I'm the West Virginia Secretary of State. Born and raised in Charleston, sixth generation West Virginian. Went to West Point for undergrad, then served several years as an Army artillery officer. Then after the Panama situation, I went into the Army JAG Corps, came to West Virginia to get my law degree. Married my wife, Debbie Law Warner. You notice the law in there. She's comes from the family, one of the founders of the James Law Bookstore there on Main Street in Clarksburg. We have 4 children, now all grown, all 4 of whom either are serving or have served in the U.S. Armed Forces, 2 sons-in-law who also either are serving or have served in the Armed Forces. Got 4 grandchildren and 1 on the way due here in the next month or so. So we're pretty excited about that. I spent 23 years in the military, and now I have returned to, in addition to that, I had 5 years in Afghanistan with the State Department. So I have both military background and State Department background, and that can come into play as we talk about experiences in the Secretary of State's office, how I'm bringing that experience into the state government realm, because both of those have different perspectives on how you tackle problems and address issues. And that's very on point when it comes to dealing with our county clerks, as well as coordinating up and down the chain with fellow secretaries across the United States, as well as our own Department of Homeland Security and federal government 300 agencies and so forth. And all that's very important as we get into cybersecurity and election security in general. After the State Department time, then I returned here to West Virginia, where I was elected as Secretary of State. I then moved back to Charleston, where I started out. So it's been a nice circle of life bringing me back to where I started. I'm enjoying the job immensely, and that's why I'm asking for re-election. I'm asking people's vote and support because there's work. We've done quite a bit in the office, but there's a lot of work yet to do, and that's why I'm asking for re-election.
Well, you know, Mac, it's okay to call you Mac, isn't it?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Mac, let's talk a little bit about that. You kind of segued nicely into our first question. You know, you've been in office about 4 years now. What do you feel are some of your biggest accomplishments?
I think the one that's going to have the longest term impact is the business Onestop. That was talked about for quite some time, over a number of years. And I took it really as a challenge right as we started off. I went to the governor knowing that this assignment had been given to the Secretary of State's office, and things just hadn't rolled out or moved forward with it. And it was due to, it's a complicated process to get a number of state agencies working together. But to make West Virginia competitive in today's world, it's important to make it easy for somebody to start a business. And at the time, the process was very convoluted. It's starting with just parking at the Capitol, finding your way through security and into the Secretary of State's office to start that process, getting to the right desk in the Secretary of State's office. Then once you negotiated that endeavor, you then had to get back in your car, go downtown, go through the same sort of process with the tax department. Then it was coming back in your car, back up to the Capitol complex, not the Capitol building itself, but one of the associated buildings and so forth, and finding your way to the workforce and labor departments. Very complex. Sometimes it could take days or even weeks to get through the entire process. So what we did is I gave it to one of the brighter, young, energetic people in the office, and I said, look, you got a year. Let's see if we can make this happen. But to start with, I went to the governor's office, and I spoke with the governor in person, said, look, these are state agencies, not accustomed to working together with one another. The legislature has put this on our office to accomplish. Do I have your backing to help accomplish this? And being a businessman himself, the governor said, of course you do. Go to it. So I had that ace in my pocket if I needed to use it, because I was anticipating maybe some pushback from some of these agencies. But as we got into it, they understood the importance and they wanted to participate. But it's a complex process of actually getting through their various, the infrastructure that they have in place and getting it to meld with or connect with our infrastructure. And there are several components of this. One is the physical location. One is the portal, the web-based portal. And then the third is the phone system. And so within a year, we actually had the first piece accomplished, and that was what I thought might be the hardest, and that was get people co-located. So right now on Washington Street, we found a location of building, free parking. There's no the security checkpoints and so forth. You can go in and work, literally walk right across. In one case, it's across the room, or two cases, and then just in the same building with all four agencies: Secretary of State, Tax Department, Workforce and Labor, all in one location. And now we've added a fifth, and that's a small business development center with a kiosk. And once you enter your data into that, within 24 hours, you will have a call back from a coach from the SBDC, and that's to help grow your business. So I really do think that, and we're getting rave reviews from people who have used it. It is self-sustaining. People are paying for expedited services fees to move their paperwork to the front of the line so they can get their businesses opened in 1 hour or 2 hours, that sort of thing. And so we haven't really had to go back and request excessive money or whatever from the legislature to make this whole process work. So again, we're running government like you would run a business, and it's working, satisfied customers. And that's why I would say that's probably the biggest accomplishment, or one that's going to have the longest term impact on the people of West Virginia, because we all want to grow the economy, grow jobs, and this is a way that the government is helping do that.
As far as that location is concerned, so it's like one-stop shopping. They can go and have several different people there to assist them with any paperwork. Is that what you're...
Exactly. We actually have a person from tax, we have a person from workforce, we have a person from labor, all in this one location, and it makes it very easy. So like I said, you park, free parking, you go inside, and you can deal with all four state agencies at one time. You're not going back and forth, as I mentioned before. And again, rave reviews from everybody that's been using it, how simple it is. Also, that phone system and the coordination, I've had people call and say, hey, in fact, I was talking with someone this morning where they had to set up entities in 3 different states, and they said by far West Virginia was the easiest to use, the most friendly customer service related people. And that's what we really have stressed in the office, is that customer service, whether it's in the business arena, helping that customer who's wanting to start a business, or in the elections arena, either that candidate or somebody who has a question about the election process, a voter, just dealing with people as individuals, one-on-one. And that's, I think we see that across West Virginia. It's a very friendly state. And when people deal with a New York or Pennsylvania and then have to deal with West Virginia, they find it refreshing how customer oriented our people are.
Very good. You know, with the election, nearing, there's been so much talk about election security. And while there's a lot of different areas to delve into, what are your thoughts on election security in West Virginia? Should people be confident that this election will be conducted fairly and timely and will have results as quickly as possible?
Absolutely. People should be very confident in the election process and the integrity of the election and voting themselves, whether it's in person or absentee. We are so far ahead of many of the other states. We had perhaps the most successful, cleanest primary in the United States. In fact, I was recognized for that. I give that shout out to the various clerks and our elections division, all the people that worked so hard behind the scenes to make the election safe. And then the voters themselves for following the CDC guidelines and the social distancing and so forth. So we had 0 cases of COVID-19 during the primary. So from a health and safety perspective, we even have more protocols in place. I was at a presentation this morning where Anheuser-Busch has donated hand sanitizer, not just here in West Virginia, but across the United States. We're getting that distributed to all the voting locations. If you may recall, during the primary, it was difficult to even get hand sanitizer and other PPE. That was one of the reasons why the governor delayed the election 28 days. And because of that, that enabled us to get our hands onto that equipment, get it distributed, get the poll workers trained on it, and that it worked beautifully. And so we're doing the same thing for the general election, and we're actually months or even months ahead of where we were in the primary. We've been through this once. The clerks understand the process. They understand how much work it is. But by way of example, we are actually improving this general election process. We've opened up an electronic portal which allows people to request their absentee ballots much faster. So when people apply online for their absentee ballot, the next day that ballot is going out. 98.6% of the people who have requested online are getting that ballot put in the mail the next day to them. The clerks are that efficient, and the system is that efficient. They're not having to do that data entry that they did during the primary using those paper applications, which is why the clerks asked me not to send those applications out across the state. That application was an aberration because of the governor moving the election during the primary. That those paper applications were a way of notifying people the election had been moved and that everybody in the state was eligible to vote absentee. So it kind of served a dual function. Once people understood that they could vote absentee in the general, then the ability to request the applications online has worked wonderfully. It has reduced the amount of paperwork that the clerks aren't having to transfer that data from paper into the system. It's done automatically. It reduces human errors. It reduces legibility issues. People that may have left out a key field, such as a birth date or a driver's license number, the electronic system won't allow you to submit it unless you have that key information in. So the clerks are extremely pleased with it. And every time that you save the clerk's time in that regard, it frees up time that they can spend with somebody who may not feel comfortable using the electronic devices to request a ballot. And right now, we've had 120,000 people request absentee ballots. About 60,000 of those have already been returned, and about 50,000 of those have been done online. So you can see the amount of time and effort that's being saved for the clerks, and that the system is working extremely well. The last part of this is that we are out in front of notifying people about this election process. You can see so many people have already voted in this election, and that's why I think that West Virginia is going to do just as well or better during the general as we did in the primary. And it's a long answer to your question. Yes, people should feel safe, secure. The election is secure. We have the same anti-fraud task force in place as we did in the primary. It worked wonderfully well. And so everybody should now just choose how you're going to vote. Go ahead and prepare, whether it's the absentee process, early voting, which starts a week from tomorrow, October 21st to October 31st, or on Election Day. All 1,708 precincts are going to be open. We've recruited a huge number of poll workers, both the 9,000 that we typically have, and in addition, about 4,500 additional auxiliary people standing by should there be a spike and we need to have auxiliary poll workers. So yes, we're in great shape for this election.
You know, one of the things that's kind of come out and it's kind of trending that way. I know you had done some different things with different forms of voting. With COVID-19, you know, and the absentee ballots and things, it seems like the election process, voting process is kind of evolving. And over the years, I can remember a number of lawmakers have introduced things like same-day voter registration and other forms of what proponents say encourage more voting and what opponents say could lead to additional concerns over fraud or whatever the case may be. What are your thoughts along like loosening voter registration requirements, allowing same-day registration, or like, you know, today as we do this interview, today's the last day you can register, October 13th.
Yeah.
Okay. It's the last day you can register to vote in West Virginia. So we're several weeks out. Is there a way that technology can be used to free some of those restrictions and allow for closer to or even same-day voter registration?
There's always the balance that you have to get between access and security. So what you're talking about is opening up access, but it decreases the security components of it. The key players in all this, I would encourage everybody to listen to the clerks. And that's what my administration has done, is we've brought the clerks on board, or actually I've joined them. We're in a team. But prior to my arrival, the system was broken. There wasn't the communication between the clerks and the secretary's office. It had degenerated to a point where a lot of the communication just wasn't occurring. I went in and we've implemented ways to talk with the clerks on a regular basis. I'm out there personally visiting their offices. Field teams are out there visiting their offices. We are having regular conferences and phone calls, regular interval phone conferences to hear what the clerk's input is. So when you talk about a same-day registration, think of the amount of work that that puts on the clerk and the decreased security that it may have, as well as then trying to count those ballots afterwards. How do you verify that that person is legitimate, that they are truly a resident, that they are a citizen, that they're in the right precinct voting the right ballots and so forth? You have to verify that after the election occurs. So that affects election night reporting. Well, now you've got an issue. If you're not reporting the results on election night, people are wondering, is there something nefarious happening? And so the clerks are the ones. And so I'll go back to just using that example with the absentee ballots and the paper applications. The clerks were the ones who asked me not to send out applications like we did in the primary because of the amount of work that it imposed upon them. We went from a usual 7,000 absentee ballots requests in normal elections to 260,000. So from 7,000 to 260,000 paper applications coming into these clerks' offices. And these clerks' offices aren't necessarily well staffed. These are on very thin budgets and personnel from the counties. Counties aren't well to do. They can't afford all this. So the clerks were asking, please don't do the paper applications again. Well, the same thing goes with same day registration and that sort of thing. The amount of work that would impose on them and the amount of security concerns that would raise. So to get around to answering your question, I think West Virginia has it right. Right now, the code, the elections are working well. I was asked by Congress to testify after our primary as to why we were so successful, why we had such a great primary. And I explained to them, we're one of 16 states that have the request for an absentee ballot. I think that's the proper security protocol that allows all of us to feel the integrity of the system is in place, because when somebody requests an absentee ballot, you know that there's a live person on the other end of that request, that there is a current address for that ballot to be sent to. Think about if we were a vote by mail state, and I never will advocate that because these ballots simply go out to every registered voter. And we know that I've already, with the help of the clerks, taken off 195,000 names, and we've identified another 200,000 inactive voters. Well, these ballots, if we were a vote by mail state, would have gone out to all 1.2 million registered voters. We had 450,000 people vote in the primary. That meant there would have been over 600,000 live ballots out there, more live ballots out there not being used by people than there were actual people voting. Think of the opportunities for fraud or other nefarious activity to occur. So the point that I'm making is we have it right with our current system where people are required to vote, request in their own handwriting an absentee ballot, that we also offer the opportunity to vote early, so for 10 days from October 21st to October 31st, and you can vote in person. We offer more options to vote than any other state when you start considering you can also have soldiers voting by phone, voters with disabilities voting by computer and iPad and so forth. West Virginia is leading the nation in this regard. We don't need to add additional ways such as the vote by mail, the universal vote by mail, or adding drop boxes or some of these other things that aren't in state code right now. I think our election system is working just fine. That's what the clerks are telling me. And so before we start moving down that path, I would suggest we go to the County Clerks Association and have them respond as to whether they want changes to our election law. I don't anticipate it. That's not what I'm hearing from our clerks. But thanks for that.
Mac, if I could ask a follow-up to that real quick,
Sure.
okay? First of all, I'm an advocate of the absentee balloting. I did it in the primary. I'm doing it in the general. I think the process is very good. The only concern out there really is the U.S. Mail Service has been a little bit slowed down in operations, and it's caused some delays and stuff, and people are concerned about that. In fact, I'm still holding on my general election absentee ballot to drop it off at the Marion County Courthouse. Okay.
Sure.
So when you talk about the drop boxes, that, I know you say it's not in code right now, but is that something that you would support if it was done in a secure manner inside the courthouse?
Well, there you added a couple key words: secure manner inside the courthouse. If you had either a person watching that or a video camera watching that, then yes, that would be something to be considered. The state code does require right now that you hand it to a person, the county clerk or the county clerk's designee. That's why you don't have a drop box. You are only allowed to drop off 2 ballots, okay? So if you had a drop box and it was somewhere else, could they drop off 2 one day and 2 the next and 10 at night or whatever?
Right.
And we saw in Denver that has the vote by mail and drop boxes, when they were preparing for this primary election, they went to one of the drop boxes to get it cleaned up and ready. And they found 500 ballots from the 2016 presidential election. So that drop box had not been serviced properly. And here were 500 people whose votes were disenfranchised because they weren't picked up at the drop box.
Yeah,
So,
but that would never happen in West Virginia.
well, you have these additional concerns with somebody, vandalizing it, dropping in fireworks, or
Sure.
other issues. We have drop boxes. It's the U.S. Postal Service. It's those blue boxes on pretty much every street corner. Let's use it. 96% of the time, those are delivered on time. Now, that's both good and bad. If people vote their ballots right now and drop it in, even if it gets misdirected, the post office has time to find that and get it back into where it needs to go. So I have a lot of confidence in the post office and its delivery. But I think we've all experienced that situation where a piece of mail was misrouted, and you sure would hate for your ballot to be the one that gets misrouted. So the key to that is doing it early. And that's why the post office sent out a card to all of us that said, if you're going to vote using the mail, request your ballot at least 15 days out. Now that's different than state law, but this was post office guidelines. And to submit your ballot at least 7 days out. So that's the post office's own warning that says, hey, sometimes it can take 7 days for us to get something delivered. So the key to this is what we're doing right now, and that is talking about and educating the public that there are concerns. To overcome those concerns, get started early. If you're going to vote absentee, plan for it now, request your ballot, submit the ballot, and the post office has plenty of time to deliver it. So I trust the post office, but to be extra safe, you can do just what you're doing, and that is take it down, drop it off in person, or vote in person either early or on election day.
Thank you.
Sure.
Matt, one other follow-up to that is, you mentioned the current state code. They can request that ballot up until when right now?
October 28th, but that has to be in the clerk's hand on the 28th, not postmarked by. So a little different than the ballot itself. The ballot can be postmarked on election day, November 3rd, and it'll still count. But an absentee ballot has to be in the clerk's hands by October 28th.
Obviously, when all that was in place, that was a time when pretty much mail was being processed continually in pretty much every community. The Postal Service has made a lot of changes. Moving forward, if you're reelected, would that be something you'd go to the lawmakers and talk about? Maybe the request for the absentee ballot should need to be done earlier. And
I do think that that's something the clerks may raise themselves. Say if we're going to have anticipate increased absentee balloting in the future, they may want to move that out, and that would be something that I would support.
as Secretary of the State, you're the chief elections officer, but each of these county clerks is the chief elections official in their community, and they have tremendous responsibility. In past, we've heard, some of them previously had said, they felt like there wasn't good enough communication, and there were some issues and different things that came up. You seem to have made that a key point of your effort in office to be connected with the county clerks. And you've mentioned several times during this conversation how you would want to go back to the clerks and get their opinions on things. What have you changed in terms of the communication with the county clerks, and what would you like to see change moving forward?
Well, understand, I mentioned at the beginning my military background, and so it's constantly driven into you about using the chain of command and that constant communication from the lowest lieutenant up to the highest general. And so that's just a part of my nature. You can't serve 27 years total in the military, 24 at West Point, and then 23 active duty, without just having that ingrained in you. And then the 5 years with the State Department, instead of talking chain of command, they talked about socializing issues. And so that is working with your counterparts, say in my situation, the Afghans themselves, working with other U.S. government agencies, Department of Justice and the drug eradication and so forth, all the other players that are inside the country, but then also with the World Bank and up the line. You don't get international investment in a country that's broken unless you have systems that work. And so that communication is again, just drilled into you. So now with the county clerks, it's just second nature to me to go and listen to them, what they are experiencing on the ground, because what I'm seeing in Charleston may be completely different than what's happening. And what's happening, I can tell you, in Wirt County is completely different than what's happening in Monongalia County. And unless you darken the door of that office and actually go in and talk to the clerk in person, then it's likely they may not either bring it to your attention or have the opportunity to bring it to your attention. That's why we really emphasize these every other year, these meetings and these training sessions. We actually, once the cybersecurity concerns hit from Russia, we brought all 55 county clerks together in Morgantown for a training session to emphasize what we were seeing, what Russian meddling actually meant. And then we put them through a training scenario that put these different situations, we call them injects, where you'd say, okay, you've got an active shooter at a location, or you have a chemical threat at another, or a power outage, or a cybersecurity incident. And then we train them on how to deal with that. And then we put it into a book, because clerks change and the poll workers themselves are going to have different scenarios. And so we put it into a book called a continuing operations plan. So by talking with the clerks, and they appreciated the ability to have input, we would actually have some of the clerks do the training. I actually took with me up to Harvard, the Belfer Center at Harvard in Massachusetts. I took Susan Thomas with me, the clerk in Harrison County. I took Carrie Blaney, the clerk from Montague County. These clerks who have been in office a long time, they are recognized as leaders in the clerk community. The other clerks listen to them. Let them see this firsthand, and then they came back and were part of the instruction team to talk with the other clerks. So it's much more effective, a clerk talking to a clerk, than it is me, say, preaching down to them or that sort of thing. So that's why I really value the input of the clerks, because some of them have been in these offices 10 and 20 years. Why would I not want that experience and expertise to be a part of my team when I've just been in the office 4 years? So that's what the clerk and the communications means to me. And I'm just going to continue doing that during a second term, because I've seen how valuable it is during the first term.
You know, Mac, a lot of people recognize the Secretary of State for your role in the election. Most of them even realize the business aspect. But I'm not sure how many people realize the important role that the Secretary of State's office plays in documenting and serving as the official record keeper for the governor and the legislature. And, about how many people total does the Secretary of State's office have working for it? And then how do you balance all the duties and prioritize, during, say, a pandemic with an election?
Well, I appreciate that question, because it is neat that the way we get the name secretary, that is the smallest part, the smallest division within our office. So the elections division, we only have 5 people in that elections division. The business and license division, we have about 20 or 25 people. We have then some admin, receptionists, and lawyers, and that sort of thing. But the Secretary of State, the admin section only has 2 people working in it. And so we totally have 50 people, full-time employees. That's about 8 less than what my predecessor had. So we're doing more with less. And during the pandemic, we sometimes have less than 10 people in the office. A lot of people working from home. And that was due to our forward thinking and getting everything online that we possibly can, and the technological infrastructure that we've been putting in place since I took office. When I took office, the office was in shambles a good bit, both literally and figuratively. A lot of the technological upgrades had not been made that needed to be made. That's why we've reformed campaign finance reform, the most transparent, where people have to put their campaign finances on record. ERLS, the electronic registration and licensing system, we've expanded that tremendously. So marriage celebrants, notaries, charities, scrap metal dealers, sports agents, all that can now register and keep the registrations up to date online. So that's reduced a huge amount of paperwork in the office. In that regard, the statewide voter registration system upgraded that tremendously, and so we're prepared against the Russian meddling and that sort of thing. And so now all of our people can be working from home, and have been, and we haven't missed a beat inside the Secretary of State's office. We've had just the key personnel, the secretary, myself, my chief of staff, my lawyer. We have a second lawyer who's working all the CARES and HAVA funding to make sure that money gets out to the counties in a timely fashion. So those are the key people that we're keeping inside the office, as well as finance and personnel. So less than 10 are working from the office itself, but the full function of the Secretary of State's office is still intact due to people being able to work from home.
Follow-up questions, gentlemen, before we allow Mac to close.
Yeah, I had one, sir. So you said one of the reasons that you would not be an advocate for universal mail-in voting is because of the instance of fraud. Research from the Pew Institute has shown that there is very little, if any, instances of voter fraud. There's 5 states that vote by mail universally and have done so for a while. How do you square those two kind of notions?
What I've talked about is opportunities for fraud. Remember when I gave those statistics, if you had 600,000 live ballots out there in people's mailboxes and those people had moved, now what? Okay, the opportunities are there. The 195,000 names that the clerks and I have taken off the voter registration list are 195,000 opportunities for fraud that no longer exist. We still have 200,000 yet to do. If they don't vote in this election, then they will miss their second federal election after missing 4 years of not voting and receiving a postcard and not responding to it. So there's a lot of effort that goes into that, about a 7-year process to remove a name from the list. But while that 7 years is going on, those are all opportunities that may arise. So we had the situation in Pendleton County alone where when we sent out these paper applications, a mail carrier altered 8 of those, changed the party affiliation. Now the clerk caught it, we turned it over to the task force and it worked. But had that vote by mail or vote using the mail system, using the absentee process not been there, he wouldn't have had that opportunity to commit that felony or that fraud. So my point is, I'm not saying that there's massive fraud. In fact, I'm not aware, there's a case-by-case type situation here, but I'm not worried about the massive fraud. I'm worried about the onesies and twosies, and all you have to do is look at what happened in Harper's Ferry, where one vote makes that difference. Okay, there was a significant situation where the city council turned on less than a handful of votes, and that had to go to the West Virginia Supreme Court. And when those votes are counted, it did overturn a seat, and it changes the whole complexity of what's happening in Harper's Ferry and development in the city and so forth. So I've never said that there's massive fraud, but any fraud, one vote, and we had a situation where a non-citizen purposely avoided the situation. He was caught the first time he tried to register. They told him he couldn't register. He then went to DMV and registered to vote anyway, got a ballot and voted. And so people purposely try to skirt these issues. And when we bring in these other ways of voting and registering than in person, anytime you put someone between or an entity between the voter and the clerk, it's giving rise to opportunities for nefarious things to happen. So that's why I tell people, don't trust Facebook, don't trust Twitter, don't trust anybody but the county clerk and the Secretary of State's office for your election type information. And your point is good. I don't think that there's massive fraud, but I think there's massive opportunities, and we just want to close as many of those as possible, which is why I think our legislature has gotten it right with our current code. It's working well. Look at our primary. We were singled out of all the 50 states across the United States. West Virginia was the one selected to testify in front of Congress about how successful our elections were. So if it's not broken, don't fix it. Right now, it's not broken.
Great. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Charles.
The thing I was going to mention, probably the thing that while we support it so much, is because we feel it's a way that's going to increase voter participation. And I don't see one thing that's bumped the numbers up in voter participation more than the absentee balloting you've allowed this year's primary. And so I think it's worth looking at, just to make a point. I do have a question I want to ask as a follow-up. Several times throughout the interview, you made reference to Russian election interference. Of course, that was a big thing 4 years ago and maybe even 2 years ago. Are you seeing anything so far in this general election?
Actually, we are, Andy. It's constant. It's every day. That's why we have a National Guard asset with a top secret security clearance to do nothing but watch and protect the West Virginia election system. We call it the ecosystem. It has all the components, from the voter registration, statewide voter registration, the maintenance, the list maintenance. We've inserted him at the Fusion Center, so he has the immediate resources to those 300 agencies, state police, all the intel information that's coming in. He's right there in the middle of that. And so we are seeing it, but we're also staying a step ahead of it. And that's what you always have to do in this arena. They just have to get it right once. You saw it in Illinois in the 2016. They were able to penetrate their statewide voter registration list, and it caused shockwaves across the United States. Perhaps happen again in Florida. So that's why we took that asset and employed it from the National Guard and are putting him to work right in the center of where all this information intel is coming in, so he can stay a step ahead of it. And so far it's worked. He's alerted me on several occasions of unusual activity. We now put that in. I was very instrumental as this whole thing got kicked off. I mentioned Harvard earlier. The GCC, the Government Coordinating Council, I was one of the initial secretaries of state on that wrote the protocols as to what does this mean when they named elections as critical infrastructure. At first, there was a concern that was the federal government in putting itself in to tell us how to run elections. None of the states wanted that. So we had to set up the protocols as to what this meant, what was the role of the federal government, what was the role of the Department of Homeland Security, what was our role as secretaries of states and state elections officials down to the county, who was going to report what and when. We've gotten all that worked out. We are in 1,000% better position right now in 2020 than we were in 2016, so we can stay a step ahead of the Russians. If I could, just real quickly to go back to the point that you started to make earlier when you talked about increased voter participation using the absentee ballots, that isn't, the facts don't actually bear that out. We actually had a couple percentage less participation in this election than we did in the 2016 presidential election. Now, there are different factors. That's the difficulty in this. In this election, those presidential nominees had already been determined. Biden and Trump had already been determined by the time we voted, especially after the 28-day delay. Was that the reason for decreased participation? Was it COVID-19 concerns? It's hard to say. What I will tell you, and I'm hearing this from secretaries all over the United States, just like I said, I like to listen to clerks with years and years of experience. One of my mentors, if you would, is Bill Gardner, who's been in office about 40 years, Democrat in New Hampshire. And he kind of took me under his wing, and I kind of sidled up to him early on to listen to the voting experience the election experience he's had over the 40 years or so. New Hampshire doesn't have the early voting. They don't have same-day registration. They don't have a lot of these things. And he said it hasn't affected, they typically have one of the highest turnouts in all the United States. What they find, like when you extend early voting, it doesn't increase the participation. All it does is give people more days to vote or other opportunities. But if they didn't have the early voting, those people would go and vote on election day. The statistics really don't bear out that if you say increased absentee voting, that it increases voter participation. I'll tell you the thing that's going to increase voter participation is us cleaning up those voter rolls. When we take off 195,000 dead people and people who have moved out of state, our voting participation is going to go up. And once I get reelected and we can take off these other 200,000 inactives if they don't vote in this election, you're going to see our voter participation go up. Just numerically, it has to.
Yeah, that's just math.
That data.
That's not math. That's not more people casting votes, okay?
Right.
Unless there was some mystical vote counting going on with dead people. But I'm going to go back and ask you another question. How many absentee ballots were cast in the primary election this year?
224,000.
Yeah. I think that without those 224,000 in COVID-19, you would have had a lower total vote turnout. I think we can agree on that.
But right, but nobody ever advocated not doing that. When you have a COVID-19 situation, you adjust accordingly. That's what we've done.
Well, Matt,
so this whole discussion leads me to ask you: are you for absentee balloting going forward, or are you against it?
I'm for allowing people to vote, however it is that they can vote, whether it's absentee. That's why we started allowing soldiers and overseas citizens to vote using an electronic device. Voters with disability, I thought it was great. We had a unanimous decision by our legislature, bipartisan, to extend electronic voting to voters with disabilities. I've been down to visit a quadriplegic who literally can't get out of bed, hasn't voted. He's 35 years old, and this is the first time he's going to be able to vote because we're allowing him to vote electronically. So I'm for all forms of voting, Andy.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, Mac, we'd like to give you just a couple minutes to wrap up there and tell the people of West Virginia why you should be reelected as Secretary of State.
I should be reelected because there's work yet to be done. We've made fantastic development since I took office. We've actually literally and figuratively cleaned up the office. We have the right team in place to get the work done. We're doing a fantastic job of improving the infrastructure, allowing people to register their business online, the business one-stop we've talked about, the electronic, allowing people to vote in all different fashions, as we just talked about. All of that is taking place, and that we're doing it with the cooperation and the assistance of the county clerks. I keep emphasizing that because that is such a key component of everything we do in the elections arena. It is an election season. This election is well underway. If you liked the way the primary was run in West Virginia, then I'm your candidate. We're doing the same thing in the general election. We're not out there trying to change things just for the sake of changing things because they sound good. We will always abide by state law. We are doing that as we extend things such as the absentee voting, using the mail, not voting by mail where the ballots go out, but where people apply for it. We're staying consistent with state law. And so that's what I really enjoy about the job, is that challenge of making things work consistent with the state law. If something needs to be changed, I've got that dialogue with both the Senate and the House. I've got the dialogue with the governor. We all work extremely well together. And so that makes coming to work fun. I'm often the first person in the office in the morning, sometimes the last to leave at night. And that's not to brag. It's simply a fact that I love the job. My 4 children are grown. They're out of the house, extending everywhere from Alaska to North Carolina. And my wife's got a real estate job that keeps her busy. That allows me to devote 100% of my time to the job of Secretary of State. I love the state. I love traveling the state. And as I said, there's work to be done. I love working with the clerks. That's why I'm asking for another 4 years. I'm asking for the voters' support to reelect me. I will continue to do the job that I've done the first 4 years. And I appreciate this opportunity to talk with you, your readers, and the voters of West Virginia.
Thank you very much, Mac.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time.
Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.